This meeting is being recorded.
There we go. So now we're recording and I will begin. So hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. Today I will present over pumps, presses, and filters. Essentially winery equipment you need to make wine. My name is Aaron Essery. I am the Assistant Extension Specialist for Viticulture and Enology here at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Today is Thursday, November 2nd, 2023, and we will begin. Okay, so pumps, presses, and filters. We will start with pumps. Okay, so pumps are used in the winery to move wine around the cellar, as I'm sure all of you know. But not all pumps are the same, nor should they be used in the same way. There are many different types of pumps. And the four we will talk about today are the flexible impaler pump, a rotary load pump, something called a peristaltic pump, and then one that I'm really unfamiliar with but is still around is called the Manu pump. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but for the sake of what I think it should be called, I'm going to say Manu. So these are the four we will discuss today. So, flexible impaler pump. These are versatile pumps, and they are usually found in every winery. They are very versatile pumps. They use positive displacement pumps. That's what they're called. That's how they pump. It's their pumping action is a positive displacement pump. And they can move wine, juice, and must. If you don't know, there is a difference between all three. But the flexible impaler is usually found in every winery. These pumps have a rubberized impaler, hence the name, that flexes to pull wine through the pump. So it doesn't push wine, it pulls wine or juice or must. So it's a pulling vacuum type action. These pumps are easy to clean because of the few mechanical parts, and they are very common. Like I say, every winery I've worked in has used a flexible impaler pump to some extent. The one thing with these pumps is they should not be operated dry. You never want to run these pumps dry. They need to be primed for operation, and all priming consists of is just flooding the cavity before you turn it on. So you simply connect the pump to a tank, open the tank, let the liquid flood the cavity of the pump, and then turn it on. So you don't want to operate these dry. The downside to flexible impalers is that rubber impaler inside does wear out with time, which can also leave bits of rubber into the wine or juice or must, just FYI. They are not the best pumps to use on a finished wine. So these flexible impalers, they're very versatile, and you can use them on finished wine, but you really shouldn't. They're rough on the wine. They're an impaler. They bang and smash and churn, and so it's really harsh on a finished wine. And then the impaler should be removed if stored for many months. So like, let's say it's, the summertime and you're in the vineyard and you have one of these pumps. I would recommend pulling the cavity off and pulling the pump out. It's not hard. It's 4 bolts, but that flexible impaler, as you'll see in this next slide, flexes. And so if it's constantly in a flexing motion or constantly in a flexing state, it's harsher on it. So yeah, here's the next slide. And I hope you can see this. You might have to move your little icon around so you can see some stuff, but this is what a flexible impaler pump looks like on the inside. So it's literally a rubber flexible impaler that pulls wine through. You turn it on, and it spins and it pulls wine. But like I say, if you're going to store that pump for many months on end, you want to remove that impaler during storage, just so it's not in a constant flexing motion. But these are good pumps. They're versatile. And they're likely should be one of your first pumps if you're just starting. So a flexible impaler pump is a good pump to use. Just know it's going to be a little rough on a finished wine. Okay, next slide. A rotary load pump. So this is a pump that's very common as well. It's a good pump to have, good pump to use. A rotary load pump uses 2 rounded lobe gears to move wine. They are great for both high and low flow rates. You can turn them on high, you can turn them on fast. And they're good for bottling. So if you have a finished wine and you're looking to bottle, 100, 200, 500 gallons by hand, these are good pumps to do that. They're much more gentler on the wine. Right, the rotary lobe pumps are gentle on the wine, and it does not aggressively agitate the fluid. As a flexible impaler, think of like a boat impaler. It's just, or an impaler on a boat. It's just churning and churning and churning. Where rotary lobe pumps are, the way their gears are, they're just much easier on the wine. They're simple to maintain, easy to clean, and a rotary lobe pump will last the life of your winery. So if you have a young winery and you're just kind of starting and you're thinking, what pump should I get? Rotary lobe is a good investment. The downside, so there's always going to be a downside with these. These are not made from must. So must is grape juice with the skins and seeds. You do not want to move must with a rotary lobe pump. It might be impossible, as you'll see in this next slide. These are not made for must. So do not buy a rotary lobe pump for must. Buy a rotary lobe pump for higher end finished wines. If you have 5-year-old wine still sitting around in a tank, you might want to use a rotary lobe pump to move it. Foreign objects that get stuck in the pump may damage the pump, as you'll see, because of the low clearance. So this is a rotary lobe pump, and this is the internal workings. So let's take a look at that bottom left picture. This is a close-up image of a rotary lobe pump, of something called a Waukesha pump. Anyway, you can see how tight that clearance is. And there's no flexible impaler, there's no rubber, this is all metal. This is stainless steel metal designed this way. And these gears are very tight clearance. This is great for a finished wine. It's not so great for must or foreign objects. Dare something other than juice or wine gets sucked through here, it might damage the pump. So very, very, very tight clearance, not recommended for solids at all, but great for finished wine. So there's pros and cons with everything, and this is just a cutaway of a rotary lobe pump. Again, good for bottling, great for finished wines. So just that. All right, a peristaltic pump. These are less common, but still around. A peristaltic pump is extremely precise and can pump and remove exact amounts of liquid per rotation. Operates by using a lobe shaft that rotates to squeeze a soft tube filled with wine. So peristaltic pumps, there's actually not a cavity per se. The wine will never actually touch the gears of this pump. As you'll see in the next slide, these pumps push a soft tube that the wine goes through, so that the wine never actually touches the gears. You'll see in a minute. These pumps can tolerate some sediment, some semi-solids, and they can be used for must. I've never used one of these pumps for must before, but they say you can do it. I don't know. I like the idea of just using it for juice or wine. But anyway, these pumps, though, are self-priming, which means you can operate them bone dry. If you have like a young intern in a cellar that has never made wine before and you have a peristaltic pump, I would put that young intern on this pump because it's hard to mess up. You can run this pump absolutely bone dry and it's no problems at all. It's not going to hurt it. These two are good for bottling. Now the downside of these pumps is they're really large and awkward. Like they're kind of cumbersome, and they're very hard to pump up an incline. So if your winery is built either with a second floor or on a slope or something, it's hard to pump uphill with these pumps. So just keep that in mind too. And here is the illustration of a peristaltic pump. So inside that, if you look on the pump on the bottom right picture, there's a top port and a bottom port. One is the inlet, one is the outlet. And within those ports is a plastic or a silicone tube in which the wine or juice actually travels through. So you can see on this demonstration here, this is how it operates. You have these gears that actually push on this tube to push wine or must through. So it's very gentle on the wine. The wine never touches the gears; it stays within this tube. And these are just how they operate. So, just however you design your winery, however you operate your winery or however you move your wines will determine what pump you need. This is how a peristaltic pump operates. All right, next slide. Okay, something called, and I could be pronouncing this wrong, is a Monnier pump. I'm gonna say Monnier. I think they're French, but I'm not quite sure. But it was invented by René Monnier, sometimes also called a monopump or a progressive cavity pump. I have never used one of these pumps in my life. I've only researched them and looked them up. But this pump works by turning a long helical rotor within a helical shaped housing. And these pumps are great for moving huge volumes of either must or wine at once. They're self-priming, positive displacement, and they're very easy to clean. They have one function, and it's to move stuff. So if you have a lot of volume you're moving, this pump might be your choice. The downsides is they're usually expensive, and they're mostly stationary. This one here in the top right corner of the picture, you can see it's on wheels, but I've seen other pictures where they're just like mounted on the floor next to the crusher. So you'll dump grapes into a crusher, they'll get crushed, and then they'll go straight to this pump, and they just move it, blast it across the winery to a tank. They can move a lot of volume, just FYI. And here is kind of how they work. So again, Monnier is what I'm saying. I could be pronouncing that wrong, but this is a cutaway of a Monnier pump, and it has just one long helical shaft that rotates inside of a helical shaped housing, and it just pushes everything through, your wine or your juice or your must coming through the top. That helical rotates and just pushes it out the end. So these are, I've never used one of these in real life, but these are how they work apparently. So just FYI. Right. Any quick questions on this real fast? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I will just continue. All right, presses. Now we're getting into presses. So presses. Presses are necessary in all winemaking operations. I mean, all of them. You'll use a press at some point if you're making wine. There are many different types of presses for different winery needs. Volume makes a difference in press choice. If you're just making 100 gallons, 200 gallons, it's going to be different. If your press choice will be different than if you're making thousands of gallons. So the main types of presses we'll talk about: a vertical basket press, a pneumatic horizontal press, and then something called a screw press. So we'll just dive into it. So a vertical basket press. These are very common, and they're probably the introductory press to anybody looking to get into winemaking. So these presses date back as far as ancient Rome. I mean, I'm talking, back when they started making wine, these are kind of the presses they would use. They were first constructed of wood, and some still are today, just for tradition's sake. But the basket is loaded with the grapes, while a plate on top pushes the fruit down. I'm sure some of you have used a basket press if you've made wine. And then liquid is then leached from the sides and then collected. And I'll get to that next slide. Modern basket presses are made of stainless steel. Hello, thank you. If you're just joining, please mute yourself. Modern basket presses are made of stainless steel and then usually operated manually, but some are automatic. The disadvantage to a basket press is that it's really not made for high volume. And then also when you are pressing your must, there's something called a cake that happens. It's not cake, but we call it a cake. The cake needs to be manually refluffed and extracted to get more. But I'll get into that this next slide. So this is a basket press. This is a vertical basket press. These are three different types, but they're essentially all operate the same. On the far left is a picture of a very small basket press. You just load the grapes in the basket. That handle, you'll unscrew it all the way to the top, load your grapes, and then screw it down manually, and it presses, all the grapes, and you collect the juice. This middle picture is an old, it says 1880. I don't know if that's actually a year or just a number, but I wouldn't doubt if it is from the 1880s. That's, you know, a wooden basket press and a manually, you know, you see a big handle off to the side that you would use to churn it. And then to the right is just a modern basket press, automated, you know, control board on the left. But they all operate the same. You lift that plate, you put the grapes in, you push the plate down, and you extract the juice or the wine. So that's how they work, and these are great for beginner winemakers, 1-year-old cellars. You know, if you're getting into wine, a vertical basket press is a good choice. All right, next slide. So this is something called the horizontal pneumatic press, or a pneumatic horizontal press. Either way, a bladder press, horizontal press. I've always called them horizontal presses, but I think the proper name is pneumatic horizontal press. These are phenomenal presses across all spectrums of winemaking. I recommend horizontal presses. They're very good. These presses utilize a rubber inflatable bladder that's housed inside a horizontal drum. So the grapes are loaded into the drum. The bladder swells, usually with air, and it pushes the grapes against the inside of the drum. The liquid leaches out the sides, and then it's collected. This horizontal drum rotates to fluff the cake. Again, the cake is the matter that's being pressed. This horizontal press, the drum will rotate, which will refluff the cake. And then also it can dump the pumice, the spent pumice as well. So there's no manually digging the pumice out. The horizontal press will rotate and dump the pumice out. And then again, great for all wineries. I recommend a horizontal press. I mean, if you're harvesting, you know, a ton's worth, like, which is really not a lot in a vineyard setting. If you have a ton of grapes that you're processing, horizontal press, truly, because you can go all the way up to many tons. So I recommend horizontal presses really across the board. The disadvantage of a horizontal press is that bladder inside can rupture. It's a rubber bladder, but, you know, not that you should ever throw a pruner in there, but sometimes, you know, when you're harvesting, things get lost in the mix, and I've seen pruners come through the sorting table. So just be wary that is a rubber bladder inside, and it can rupture. If that bladder does rupture, your press is shot. You have to get a new bladder. And then also the circuit board can malfunction, especially if it's splashed. Now these are, you know, as long as you're being cautious, you'll be fine. But just know that circuit board can malfunction, especially if you're moving a lot of volume and you keep splashing juice or must onto the circuit board. It can rupture. Okay, next slide. And this is cutaway. So this is a horizontal press. And they vary in size. They can vary from, I don't know the exact tonnage or gallonage, but from small to large. You can put 40 tons into one of these presses. You can put a half ton into one of these presses. So they're very, very wide ranging in terms of volume. But this is essentially how they work. So that drum sits horizontally and the doors open on the side. You load your grapes in, you close the doors, and then this control box, which is your circuit board to the left, is how you operate it. And it's usually automated. They usually have cycles, like you pick cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3, and you just, you know, press it, you press the button, press start, and you can walk away. Well, I say as long as you have something to catch the liquid with. So it's automated and it's wonderful. The right picture shows how it operates. So you load the grapes in, and then as that bladder swells, you see that top empty portion is actually the bladder filled with air. The bottom portion is the grapes being crushed. And so that bladder just swells and it pushes the grapes against the inside of the press, and then you catch the liquid at the bottom. So horizontal presses, I recommend them. They are the bee's knees, in my opinion. They're very good. Okay, next slide. So a screw press. This is, oh, no. It says this meeting will end in 5 minutes. I don't think that's true. I will keep an eye on that. I hope not. Screw press. These are very efficient for mass production. If you're moving a ton of volume at once, a screw press. I've never used one of these, but they can move a lot of volume. A large screw is housed that rotates inside a serrated drum, and I'll get to that in a minute. The grapes are pressed against the inside of the drum, and the liquid is extracted, similar to the drum and the horizontal press. But with this type of press, it's continuously rotating. There's no starting and stopping. There's no loading and unloading. It's you dump the must into one side, the spent pumice is shot out the other, and the liquid is collected at the bottom because it's a continuous screw that's just rotating and pushing things along. The disadvantage to one of these is that they are extremely harsh on the wine. They're going to grind and churn and mess and tear up everything. So it's really harsh on the wine. In fact, it's so harsh that some of these old world winemaking regions actually ban them. Especially for higher end making wines. So they're that harsh on the wine. They don't think it's quality friendly. So they just say, no, we're not going to use a screw press. You can't, if you're going to make one of the top end wines here in this region, you can't use a screw press. So just FYI. And here is the next slide. So this is a cutaway of how it works. And again, I think these are used in other industries. They're not necessarily used in the wine. Well, I guess they are used in the winemaking industry, but they're not really for the winemaking industry. So, but this is how it works. Everywhere you see sludge, just pretend that's pumice or must. Pretend that's must. So must goes in the hopper on one end, feeds into the screw, and then that screw just churns. And you can see what is called the filtrate would be the wine coming out, and then what is dewatered sludge would be your pumice. So you just load must into the top. It feeds down. The screw turns and rotates and grinds against the drum. Wine falls out, pumice is shot out the other end. And this thing, there's no starting and stopping. You can just turn it on forever, and as long as you have must to feed in, you can continue feeding it. So it's very efficient for moving a lot of volume at once. All right. Any questions? And I need to check and see why it wants that meeting. I need to check real fast. So let's take a quick 1 minute intermission. If the meeting stops, I'm sorry. I don't know why that is. Okay, well, I hope it doesn't stop. I don't know why it would stop, but we're just going to keep going. If we get disconnected, I'm sorry. But everything looked clear on my end. Okay. Any quick questions? Not seeing any chats. All right, I'll keep going. Okay, so now we're into filters. We've talked about pumps, we talked about presses. Now we're going to discuss filtration, which is usually the last step before bottling. Okay, so filters. There are not many, there's actually a few options. There are a few options when it comes to wine filtration. Most often wines do need to be filtered at some point, but it's not absolutely necessary. There are some wineries actually that never filter at all. All they do is rack and rack and rack and rack and rack until their wine is clear enough that they deem it okay, and then they bottle it. So there are a few handful of wineries out there that never filter. All they do is rack. But that takes a lot of time. So, but today we're going to discuss filtration. So the different filters we're going to talk about is a plate and frame filter, something called diatomaceous earth, and then also something called cross-flow filtration. And we will discuss all of these three now. So a plate and frame filter. These are very common across all wineries. Almost 2 of the wineries I've worked in have used a plate and frame. There's one winery I worked at did not use plate and frame, but they are common. This method of filtration uses porous filter pads seated between plates that work to